Hello everyone! Today I will guide you on how to use the SQL Search API to search for documents in Elasticsearch. This approach will be particularly helpful for those who are more familiar with SQL than with Elasticsearch's default Query DSL. In previous videos, we used the Query DSL to perform document searches. Essentially, you have an index and a query, which you provide to the search method. Elasticsearch then uses Query DSL to return the best matching documents. However, there is an alternative. You can perform the same searches using SQL, providing a more familiar method for SQL users. The SQL Search API offers several useful parameters, including the limiter. This parameter specifies the character used to separate values in the output. For example, in CSV format, you might use a comma, but you can choose a different delimiter if needed. We have format. This one determines the format of the query results. Options include JSON, CSV, text, and others. Cursor is used for paginating results efficiently. Fetch size sets the maximum number of rows to return in each response. We have filter. This one allows you to apply additional criteria to narrow down the search results. We will see how to use this later. We have request timeout. This one defines how long the system should wait for a response from the server before timing out. Finally, I want to talk about page timeout. This one is similar to request timeout, but applies specifically to the time given for fetching and returning each page of results. This is crucial for managing performance in paginated queries, and we have other parameters. You can click here to check them out in the documentation. Let's walk through a simple example. We use the SQL API and call the query method. In this case, I have specified that the output format should be text. The query will select all rows from the library index, sort them by page count, and limit the results to the first 5 documents. Here, library is the index, page count is the field we are sorting by, and 5 indicates the size of the result set. Elasticsearch supports various output formats such as CSV, JSON, CSV, TXT, etc. To change the response format, simply include the format argument in your query method. Next, let's cover pagination. We use the cursor parameter to paginate through results. But how do we get the cursor value? It is straightforward. You run your initial query, which returns results along with a cursor value. If this cursor is present, it means there are more results available. If there is no cursor, you have reached the end of the index. Now let's discuss filtering. It is simple. Just add your filter query. The SQL API will execute the SQL query and filter the returned documents based on your criteria. And if you want to control the number of documents returned by the filter query, make sure to use the fetch size parameter. Finally, you can use the SQL Translate API to convert a SQL query into a Query DSL query. This is helpful if you ever need to switch back to using Query DSL and don't want to learn the syntax as an example. Using SQL in Elasticsearch is great for those who prefer not to learn Query DSL. However, be mindful of its limitations. For more information on these limitations, please visit the official Elasticsearch documentation. Now let's go to VS Code to see how to work with SQL in Elasticsearch. Open notebook number 22. Once again, if you want to get access to the notebooks and the slides, you will find a link in the video description that will take you to GitHub. Once you go there, feel free to clone the repository. Now the first thing we need to do is to connect to Elasticsearch and then index the data. Here I'll be using the astronomy JSON file. We have used this before. And now let's verify. So we should have 10 documents. Great. Now let's move to the SQL Search API. First, let's start with a simple select query. So here I am selecting just the title. Let me show you how the astronomy JSON file looks like. You can see that we have some documents, and each document has 3 fields: the ID, the title, and the content. And here with this SQL query, we are just taking the title field and we are selecting all rows from my index and ordering the results by the ID field, and we are getting just the first 5 documents. So if I run this, you can see that we are getting the solar system, black holes, galaxies, the Big Bang theory, and finally the exoplanets document. Now let's change the response format. To do this, you just pass another argument, which is called format. So you see this is basically a JSON object, but if I decide to use text instead, you can see that it is different. Or if I use CSV, you see that now we have a delimiter, which is a comma. So we can play with this. And here again, I show you how to use text. This one is CSV, tab separated value. So yeah, you can play with those values. Now let's move to filters. Filters are easy. So here I am selecting all documents from astronomy.json. But after that, I will select the document that contains black holes in the title. Basically, I should get just one document, and this is what I am getting. You can see that black holes has the ID number 2, which is this one. Pagination. I told you to be able to use pagination, you need the cursor value. But to obtain the cursor value, you need to make an initial request. So let's do that. So here you can see that I am using fetch size 5. You can either, limit the query to 5 in the SQL query, or if you don't want to do that, you can come in here and pass in the fetch size parameter. Now, if I run this, you can see that this is the cursor value. And after that, this is what I can do. So I can loop until the cursor does not exist, then I will stop. But if the cursor value exists in the response, this means that there are still documents that I can retrieve. So after making the initial request, I was able to make another request. That gave me 5 more documents. And finally, I got the cursor value, which is here, right here. But when I tried to make the request again, I didn't get documents because I was able to retrieve all of them. So when I reach this point, I will just stop and break out of the while loop. Finally, we have the translate API. Let me remove the file. You can see that initially this is the SQL query. But what if I want to get the Query DSL representation? That's easy. So you use the SQL API, and here it provides you with the translate method. Basically, you pass the SQL query and you get back the equivalent query, but in query domain specific language that Elasticsearch understands. And you can see this did a great job. For example, here we have limits, which is equivalent to size. Here we have order by, which is sort. You can see that here we are sorting by the ID. Here order is descending. Great. You get the point. If you want to translate the SQL queries to query domain specific language, you can do that with the translate API. We arrived at the end of this tutorial. I hope that it was helpful and informative. Please, before leaving this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.